What is going on, y'all? Welcome to another episode of Breaking the Kernel. And today we're going to be talking about what's going on in Ukraine with Russia. And today I have my friend Roxy joining us. Roxy, thank you so much for joining. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing swell. Thank you again for taking your time out for this and humoring us with this. I know this is a very serious issue, and there's a lot of things going on. This is very complex issue as well. So I guess I want to start with how has the war personally affected you or your loved ones?
hmm well, first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me to talk at your podcast. It's important for me to know that people care and want to know. So I'm honored. Thank you.
No, thank
Um,
you.
and I also want to, before we begin, I know we're going to talk about Ukraine today, but for me, it's also important to recognize broader struggle for justice and freedom. And it's February, Black History Month. And I want to say that my heart is with all those people that work tirelessly and continuously for the fight for those two things that matter to me so much. So yeah, I'm deeply grateful. Um,
Thank you.
and and then for as far as my own experience goes, so I guess I'll just introduce myself a little bit. So
Yeah.
I'm proudly born and raised Ukrainian. I've lived in Ukraine my whole life until I was 20. And then after annexation of Crimea, my mom decided that it would be best for one of us to go live abroad. So that's when I moved to Canada, and I've been living here ever since. So I'm speaking to you today from Toronto. um, so honestly, the war has taken quite a lot from me, but I feel kind of like it feels wrong for me to talk about my tragedies because compared to what average Ukrainians are going through, um, my problems, like I can't even call them tragedies to be honest. And I have a lot of survivors guilt.
Hmm.
That's a term.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, for one, I live abroad, so I don't wake up to air raids or explosions. I'm very fortunate that my mom and my sisters live here in Toronto with me. But my brother and my dad, they still live in Kiev in Ukraine. So they do wake up to those air raids and explosions every other night. Well, okay, I should say they don't even wake up to them anymore because they've gotten so used to them, and it's kind of like it feels so wrong. So they live in the war, and I live in fear for them. Um, but I'm also incredibly lucky that everyone in my family is alive. Everyone except for my grandfather. He passed away in the first few months of the war. He was already in poor health, and him and my grandma, they live just outside Kiev, and areas that were hit the hardest in the first few weeks. So, when the Russians were encircling the city, and he just couldn't get the care he needed, and he didn't survive. And also, my other grandmother's house was completely destroyed, but thankfully nobody was at home. And Now it's been 3 years. Today is February 24th. We're marking third anniversary since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And the war kind of became normal part of our lives, um, if you can even call it normal, I guess. And occasionally after big nightly bombings, I call my brother and my dad, and I ask them how they're doing, and we just tell each other how much we hate Russia, and then we just move on. And we call it a war-life balance. I've actually been to Ukraine twice since the full scale, but that's probably a whole other episode.
No, first of all, thank you for sharing that with us, and I'm sorry to hear about your grandfather, and I'm sorry to hear about just again being me being an American and just like hearing what's going on, especially when it first happened. I know when it first happened, it broke, and I forgot. I think I was on one of the news article sites or whatever, and then it was like breaking news unfolding,
Mhm.
and then being so how far we are away from it. Sometimes you tend for us. You tend to forget sometimes about what's
Mhm.
happening on different parts of the world. when it's not something that's close to you or something that somewhere that I've traveled, me speaking for just me personally, but
Hmm.
hearing stories like yourself and just hearing your perspective is like a sobering feeling because it's like, as someone who has dealt with my own struggles and then seeing other people going through their experiences and kind of like processing how that's happening. I know the process factor of certain things, and I guess that brings up another important question is,
Hmm.
and I know this is a hard question, so just break it down as much as you can. Is how did we, in your opinion, how did we get here? Like, how did
Hmm.
because I know for a lot of people, when it comes to war, or when it comes to disputes, especially internationally, there's sometimes a cause and effect, and it's not as simple as a cause and effect. There's all kinds of emotions, all kinds of politics, all kinds of humanity issues that come into play with these kind of things. But in your opinion, how do you think we got to here? Especially 3 years you said removed from when it started?
Yes, yeah, it
Yeah,
started in 2022. Yeah. So, okay, this is a huge question.
yeah,
One that would probably take like a deep dive into history and understanding of different mentalities and a lot more. But I'll just try and like sum up maybe in well, not in few sentences, but I'll try and keep it short.
go ahead,
um,
take your time.
so basically, think of it like this. The current war is just the latest war in a very long history of resistance, of Ukraine's resistance against Russia's attempts to colonize us. And we say in Ukraine, we're in the third year of 11-year-long war that started 300 years ago. So I guess like from like Ukraine's Cossacks of 17th century fighting for their land against like Russian Empire and the Tsar to like forced collectivization under Soviet rule, which basically like effectively enslaved Ukrainian people in villages into collective farming. It's known as kolhosps, which led to Holodomor, which is an artificial famine happened between 1932 and 1933, was orchestrated by Stalin, that estimated to have killed anywhere between like 4 to 7 million Ukrainians. Actually, my grandma, who I mentioned earlier, whose house was destroyed, she survived Holodomor. Um, and then, under Soviet rule, Russia also carried out like mass deportations and forcibly changed like the demographic composition. So like, remove Ukrainians, fill it up with Russians. Helps when you want to keep, hold those like fake elections or whatever feeds their narrative. Um, Ukrainian culture and identity was also brutally suppressed historically, most notably during 1930s. Um, there was it's called the executed Renaissance of Ukraine, when a lot of Ukrainian poets and writers and artists were systematically persecuted and killed by the Soviet regime. And then Second World War, there was a partisan organization called Ukrainian. Um, I'm trying to think of the word in English. Ukrainian Insurgent Army. It's in Ukrainian. It's called
Okay,
UPA. Um, and they fought against both Nazi and Soviets, and then trying to reach Ukraine's independence. So fast forward to 1991 when Ukraine actually became independent. It wasn't just some kind of like luck or just happened like that. It was many hundreds of years of Ukrainians wanting and working towards it. Um, but like even then, Russia wouldn't let go of us. So post-Soviet years, especially the so-called, like we call them the dark 90s, when there was like a lot of economic instability and like Russian meddling in our elections. One notable one was in 2004, which led to Orange Revolution. I was actually 9 years old, and I remember standing with my parents many nights and weekends on the main square in Kiev, protesting against the stolen election. Sounds familiar. And demanding our rights to choose our rights to choose our own future, basically. And so, but despite this, Russia still managed to install its puppet president, Yanukovych, in 2010, who basically scrapped years of Ukraine's effort to join the EU, and basically denying us the future we've been basically fighting for since the independence and before independence. And then in 2014, Ukrainians once again basically took it to the main square in protest, and that protest is more known around the world. It's called the Revolution of Dignity. But by that point, I was already 19, so I was standing there on the main square with my brother and my university classmates. Um, and then, yeah, so basically, Ukrainians refused to back down, and this President Yanukovych, the pro-Russian president, he decided to crush the protest, and that's when the first killings started on the square. We actually honor the first 100 people that were killed. We call them the Heavenly 100. And but okay, by the end of this revolution, we did overthrow Yanukovych, so he ended up fleeing Ukraine, and he went to Russia, and I think he's still hiding there somewhere. And that same year, Russia invaded Crimea. Basically, walked into there and announced that it's now Russia, despite very desperate resistance by the local population, which is a lot of whom are Crimean Tatars. They're the indigenous people of that land, and a lot of Ukrainian activists. But yeah, and shortly after that, like Crimea was invaded. Shortly after that, the west of Ukraine was also invaded, the territories of Donbass, where the war basically never ended to this day. And so that was 2014. In 2015, I moved to Canada, because my mom was like, hey, it'd be great if one of you guys like went and lived abroad. That was kind of like our exit strategy for our family in case, as my mom said it back then, if Putin decides to start dropping bombs on Kyiv. We all thought mom was too much at a time until obviously February 24th, 2022, exactly 3 years ago. Today is the anniversary as we speak. So yeah, this is how we got here. It was always meant to happen, and it did.
No, hearing it's always it's always something to hear the history of two people and conflict that arises and the tension that follows after it or before it, because I feel like some people would don't understand about conflict is that it doesn't just erupt out of nowhere. There's always different factions. There's always people who think they're in the right, people who think this and that, and there's opposing
Hmm.
viewpoints. And then that tension sits there, and especially when it comes to whatever conflict you want to say from all over the world, whether there's two
Hmm.
big powers or bigger two little countries, or a bigger country versus a little country, and all these
Hmm.
different things, and the people who are there, and that tension eventually explodes sometimes, and it can lead to these wars. It can lead to different atrocities. It can lead to people being what's the right word? I guess displaced from their homes, whether it's
Hmm.
from bombing raids, whether it's from you go way back in history, camps. You go. There's so many different um, ways that a lot of these things can happen, and hearing your story and how the process of like, okay, we're gonna go abroad, and that, but unfortunately, some people had to stay, behind in your family's case, and I can imagine the worry and stuff. And I'm just happy that you're able to still keep in contact, of course, with
Hmm.
them and able to conversate and do things like that. Um, and I think something that's really important. I know you said a lot, but like something that's important from that history, right?
Yeah.
Is that I feel like there is definitely a lot of misunderstanding from people on the outside looking in, right? People
Mhm.
only get their information from news sources, and even news sources not always credible and doesn't always tell a story because obviously they have something they want or a story they're trying to tell. Not saying it's malicious all the time, but just something that obviously will
Mhm.
have to leave out real people's stories and such like that. And so I guess if you know any off the top of your head, like what are some misunderstandings that you feel like specifically since I'm American, like
Mhm.
what are some misunderstandings that you feel like you've seen Americans or people internationally obviously have, like what are some misunderstandings you feel like you've seen online or you've seen at protests, whether it's against your people that you feel like okay this is like a misunderstanding that a lot of people are having.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good question. I can think of a bunch, actually, too many to put into one podcast. And also, I also want to say that it's not people's fault to not have like this deep, nuanced, understanding of other people's histories and struggles. Like, I certainly don't know everybody else's. Like, I have also like basic knowledge and I'm trying to educate myself as much as I can, but I guess like it's wrong to put too much pressure on people. Everyone has like their own lives, so I'm just
Yeah,
grateful when people are interested and want to know. So I'll tell you maybe like top five that are trending
yeah,
right
sure,
now.
sure.
um, so first one is the Russia's war goals. So um, like just I'll say it like this, it's not about territory and it's not about saving Russian speaking people from like so-called like Nazi regime in Kiev. It's not about stopping NATO expansion. In my opinion, Russia, Ukraine is just this like missing piece, without which it's like in like imperialist narrative will just like not hold. Um, like they can continue to pretending to be this like greatest, mightiest nation, um, and continue to be this like empire. But Ukrainians, because of our freedom-loving nature, they always feel threatened by us. So what they basically doing is killing us off. So we're not in their way to like their imperialist whatever goals they have. Um, so I call that a genocide because we're being killed for exactly who we are. So that's one. The second one is negotiations. Everyone's talking about negotiations. It's such a buzzword right now. So I'm just gonna say that I find it so funny that there's people around me that assume that Ukrainians never considered negotiating. Of course we did. Like we definitely did, and we've negotiated. Like we've been committed to so many negotiations for like so many years. Examples of that would be Budapest Memorandum. That's when Ukraine gave up its nukes. We can get into that if we have time. Or the Minsk agreements. There was two of them. Russia broke every single one of those agreements. So kind of our position is why would we believe them that they would uphold any new agreements we would make with them? And like besides, like how do you negotiate with someone who literally came to kill you? So that's another one about negotiations. Another big one is that Zelensky is illegitimate. Um, so even your lovely new president Trump has already picked up on this pro-Russian narrative that Zelensky is somehow illegitimate. He even called him a dictator. So let me just ask you, like, can you imagine holding elections that are free and fair in a country at war? Like, I
Yeah,
think elections like alone bring instability so much to like the country. I'm sure you know.
yeah,
But on top of that, like there are millions of Ukrainians who are like either internally displaced or have fled abroad. How can they vote? Or how can people in occupied territories vote? There are like so many cases of people being tortured just for like having simply like a tattoo of something Ukrainian. Like, how will they feel like they're free to vote for like Ukrainian president right now? And how would soldiers vote? They're in trenches. They're working. They're defending our existence. They can't vote. That's just so weird. And also, if all of those reasons are not reasonable enough, like there's also Ukrainian constitution that says that it's illegal to hold elections during wartime or under martial law. So Zelensky, in fact, is the only legitimate president we can have right now. And if we want to talk about illegitimacy, should we like not talk about Putin? Maybe
Yeah,
um,
that's fair.
so that's my third. Let me think. Okay, the fourth one. Oh yeah, okay, this big one. So the nuclear threat. Let me just say, guys, relax. There will be no nukes. In my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of Ukrainians, Russia is already fighting to its full capacity. So if it was going to use nukes, it would have already done so. There's absolutely nothing holding it back, except what it is holding it like so that it didn't use it still. Like, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whatever has been holding it back until now will continue holding it because it's something that's outside of Russia. It's not like they decided out of like their niceness to like not use it. And like when Russia says, "Oh, like we're bombing you today because because of your strike last night or something," I think that's just not true. Like Russia would have bombed today, like whether or not there had any justifications. And this whole idea, like, oh, let's not provoke aggressor more, I think is just fundamentally flawed. In fact, by not decisively responding to aggressors, we only encourage more of it. So, like, this phrase, unpunished evil grows, it kind of sounds so cliche, but it's just so painfully true. Um, think when they annexed Crimea in 2014, they had no consequences whatsoever. So they invaded Ukraine. And if they're not punished for invading Ukraine, there's all the chances that they will invade more places. And in fact, Russia has already invaded so many places. They invaded Chechnya, Moldova, Georgia, Libya, Syria, like that's just to name a few. And they're always using the same exact playbook. And it works every single time because nobody ever comes to stop them. Empires only have centers, they don't have borders. Well, they don't stop until they're forced to. So that's why Ukraine looks to its allies. And I think we've already proven ourselves as a strong and capable army. So I think at this point, this war became more than just about Ukraine. I think it's about the democratic order as we know it. And I feel like if Ukraine falls now, this post-World War II order that we've established based on freedom and mutual support will just fall with it. He'll set a precedent for other big guys with big guns wanting other parts of the world. Like I'm thinking China wanting Taiwan, or even America's very own Trump wanting Canada and Greenland. So I think, yeah. Sorry, I went on a little tangent there, I think.
No. What you're saying is accurate. What you're saying is 100%. Go ahead. Keep going.
Okay, and then I'll give you maybe one more. This idea, people call it Putin's war. It's definitely Putin's war, but I also want to say that pinning all of this suffering and all of our suffering on like just one old crazy guy minimizes the role of Russians so much. Like their role, they're being fully complicit in this as like a nation. And if like here's how I'm thinking about it. If a crazy old guy had an army of like 1.5 million people armed to teeth who like didn't support the war, we wouldn't see like cities destroyed and like people killed and robbed and raped. We would I would imagine we'd see like maybe like a revolution or like a government overthrow or something. I know that because that's what we did in Ukraine. That's exactly what we did. We had a legally elected president Yanukovych who was taking us like into a direction we didn't want to go, so we protested. And when it turned violent, we fought back and we won. So I think it's possible. And Ukraine has, about 4 times less people than Russia. So if Russians didn't support this war, they would have done something about it already, right? Like, and if they are so scared, like, okay, oppressive regime, then they clearly don't have like the numbers to outnumber this so-called regime. Like, there are a population of 140 million people. Like, how many people do you need to oppress that population? So the only reason I can think of why they haven't done anything is because I think they're just fine with it. And if that like, and if they're too scared to protest, maybe like inside Russia, then why haven't they protested outside Russia? Like, have you seen any protests by like Russians, maybe like in the States or in Europe or like anywhere? I haven't.
That's a good question.
So yeah, so that's maybe it. Maybe I'll like just stop it out with one quick fun misunderstanding. um,
No, it makes sense though. The ones you listed, 'cause I think that's a really big thing is that misunderstanding and ignorance can be a tool that's used to help
mhm,
agendas or things move a certain way, right? Because like you were saying about negotiations, I think that's
mhm,
one that was a really big one that I know a lot of people have been talking about, at least over here. A lot of people have been talking about, and
mhm.
I'm very close to DC, so like I'm like what 40 minutes from DC, so I hear a lot of
Oh,
different conversations about people um talking about these kind of things. We do see a lot of different protests about Ukraine and what's going on, right? And I think negotiation is something that a lot of people don't. I feel like either have a loose understanding about, or
mhm.
always um, they throw nukes in the conversation about
Yes.
negotiations and things like that. So that's why I was very interested when you talked about the nukes. I feel that's the hot button word I heard a lot when
Mhm.
people said that, oh, like Ukraine either had negotiations before and failed, and then nukes this and that, a lot of things about that. Um, so I know you said you were interested in talking a little bit more or like expanding on that part. So like, what about this whole idea, like you said, about negotiations, like where do you think that misunderstanding is coming from? Do you think it's like Russia pushing the narrative that Ukraine's doing this to themselves? Do you think it's a combination of that and like just people's misunderstanding about what's going on, period, and it's just causing a lot of confusion? Like, well, where do you,
Mhm.
in your opinion, where do you think that part of negotiations is being misunderstood?
Um, yeah, I think like this is a good take you have from what I said, and like um, basically like this like nuclear threat, it makes people freak out so much that they like forget about like so many things, and they just like, okay, oh shit, like let's just do what we can to like prevent it. But usually like I was saying earlier, like the unpunished evil grows. So like if they go around threatening people to like nuke, you don't just like scare away and hide and like hope that they won't do anything, but you like get up and you like, actually you're not gonna nuke, and here's why. And we like, and like you show strength and you show like that they don't get to like go around like threatening people. Because what like Russia is doing, and the a lot of like misconceptions about negotiations are definitely Russia's like propaganda, and a lot of them are like Russia's narratives. But like, I guess like when people are scared, they just want to like say whatever they have to say just so that they don't get to that worst part. But like I said, I think um, that worst part would have already came if it was coming. There's absolutely no reason why Russia haven't done it still, if they could. So the reason they haven't is because they are scared themselves of something. Something is holding them back, and this something I think is maybe NATO. Like they're they're like fighting on like Ukraine's territory, but if like a little piece of like drone flies over to like Polish border, that's like a huge deal. Everyone freaks out because Poland is NATO, and like NATO has this fifth article. You know, when you invade one, you invade all. So I think like for Ukraine to like win in this war, it needs to be part of this bigger alliance like NATO. But unfortunately, you know, with Trump, um, he's suggesting that like maybe US needs to pull out of NATO. Um, it's kind of like scary in that like it makes this whole like world order that I was mentioning after Second World War is basically it's taking like the ground from underneath it by saying, "Oh, we're gonna like leave NATO," because it was all based on like these like mutual agreements, and now like you can't rely on your ally Trump because like he's saying, actually, you know what? Today I'm not feeling like doing NATO. So it's all like really scary stuff. I think it's not like baseless. Like maybe I understand where it's coming from. Like he doesn't like that, you know, American taxpayer money go to like fight some like European wars. Like who cares about Europe? But the idea is that like this whole world order in which America also is a player. You know, like the trading, the buying and selling from each other, the travel, the free world, all of this, it comes from this structure. And when you decide that you paying too much to be part of the structure and you withdraw, the whole structure collapses and you're part of it. And it's like, and that's when it becomes like scary for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's something actually what you hit on the head about the structure going down, because I always said that, especially when you're trying to, as from the U.S. perspective, when you care so much about democracy, you care so much, from since the Cold War era, you're talking about, oh, it
Hmm.
was like communism versus democracy, and that was a big button issue. And then you also have the NATO situation, and then and I also forgot, like you said about like a piece of drone. I think it was Poland, right, that fell to or something like that
Hmm.
at one point,
It has
and they
been
got.
falling into yeah, Poland and, you know, a little bit of Romania.
Yeah. So, and those, like you said, those are issues that when that happens, that's just pieces. People get up in arms about because obviously NATO territory, and something my friend actually reminded me about that I completely forgot is it kind of speaks on what you're saying. I was curious how like you feel about the Trump administration basically kind of hinting at or basically flat out saying like the only support if they can basically, for lack of a better word, fleece Ukraine of their natural resources, in order to like
Yeah.
as like almost like a kind of a payment of like, hey, since you're not in NATO and since we're threatening to withdraw, like every day there's a different way of things going on,
Hmm.
um, and basically the kind of hinting at we kind of want your natural resources, and then I think he also said today that he wants a money back because he said this
Hmm.
was a loan, not like not a grant, it was a loan.
Hmm.
um, you know, from your perspective, for someone who, yes, you're in Canada currently, but you do obviously have family, and I'm sure you have plenty of friends
Hmm.
who are still over there,
Yeah.
and you see, you've been dealing with this for 3 years, and then obviously the whole history you're saying this is centuries of not centuries, sorry, as decades of of tension of all these different
Hmm.
things, and then currently with the situation is now, and now is brought back to money, is brought back to uh resources, been brought back to land. What is how like I guess how do you feel when you hear something like that? How do you feel
Hmm.
when negotiations feel like, okay, now they're just trying to strip us of resource, or like that's what's in
Hmm.
play for not just maybe Trump now, but obviously for Putin and different people who maybe want to strip Ukraine of some of their resources?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, so Ukraine is surprisingly very rich in a lot of those natural resources. For example, it has the most lithium in the world, if I'm not wrong. And lithium is the stuff that we make batteries out of. So, like, as we're moving into everything electronic, we're gonna need a lot of that stuff later. So I think, yeah, and Trump is like, you know, the deal maker or whatever. So like he's only interested in, I guess, getting richer and like finding ways to like make deals so he can like turn more profit. So it's not surprising that he's interested in it. And in Ukraine is kind of open to some kind of like, exchange of, support for resources, except the latest, this like proposal that Americans proposed to Kiev, basically give us 50% of all of your resources, 50% of not just resources, but like 50% of all the infrastructure, all the contracts you're gonna make, 50% of like every possible market you can ever have. So not just like the raw resources, but the whole everything comes with it in exchange for nothing. For oh, because you owe us anyway, so we'll just take it. How about that? Um, so Ukraine is like, we can't sign that. Like, basically, we're not getting anything, and we're giving away half of everything. So obviously, we couldn't sign that. That's not in like Ukraine's national interest. We are open though to like something. Yeah, we have those resources, and we need help. So like, yeah, let's talk. But like, it can't be like just like, I don't know, for like a better word, fucking Ukraine up and then taking whatever and then maybe supporting Ukraine later. So actually, this Budapest memorandum that I mentioned, uh, Ukraine signed it, I think, in 1994. Basically, Ukraine gave up its nukes in exchange for security guarantees from the US, the UK, and Russian Federation. So
Okay.
so basically, we're like, okay, fine, you can take our nukes, and we'll be a friendly nation. Um, I'm trying to like remember what it was specifically called. Anyways, so yeah, so Ukraine like enters this like non-proliferation treaty because it's better than fewer countries have nukes. It's safer, blah blah blah. But it basically removed our like insurance policy in a way. Um, so now like one of the guarantors invaded us and the other two guarantors are like supporting us. The memorandum doesn't obligate them to support us, but it's kind of like a right thing to do. And like I said, it's not just Ukraine at this point that this fight is about. Like when someone comes to us and offers like a 50% deal in return for like some guarantees, I don't think we're buying that anymore. And like, I think we need like actual stuff. We have like a pretty exhaustive list, and it's not some kind of like, imaginary something. Ukraine actually proposed a peace formula, and it includes all the steps. And if we just do those steps, like no one ever even need to send like their own soldiers to Ukraine. We can handle it. We just need what we asked for, and we need it now. We don't need it in like a little amount spread over like 5 years. So that's, I guess, it. Oh,
No, that makes
actually,
sense.
sorry if I can add one more thing about
Yeah.
Ukraine. I just pulled up my notes here. So basically, a lot of Americans are upset that so many taxpayer money go to this other European war that they don't really like are part of, and why are they like supporting anyone? So I think it's not like, I think it makes sense to some point, like but I just pulled up these notes. So remember when Biden signed a 60 billion package of support for Ukraine? I think in 2023 or 20, yeah,
Yeah, I believe.
20.
I remember what you're talking about. I forgot what year though, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, like, I actually like, this is funny story. I was like taking a flight somewhere, and I like happened to talk to this American guy who was sitting next to me. And within like first 3 minutes, I realized he was like a Trumpist, like a pretty hardcore one. And he was saying, oh, like all our money like go to you guys, like 60 billion. Like we could have had like so many like schools or whatnot. And I understand completely why he thinks that, and I would probably think the same. But I just pulled up some stats here. So, U.S. spends about 10% of the federal budget on defense. So that's like 3% of America's GDP. Um, Compared to like say Europe, Europe spends maybe two or even less. Like different countries have different percentages. Um, And then, so when Biden gave that 60 billion package, that's like 6 to 7% of that 3% defense budget. So that's like very small amount compared to the like overall US spending on defense. But like of that 60 billion, about 90% stayed within America in a form of jobs and production of defense capabilities and new equipment. So US basically takes like its old equipment, gives it to Ukraine, manufactures new equipment, and uses the 60 billion. So it's not like money go directly, like cash goes to Zelensky. It's more like there's a lot of processes start moving, and they're all like good not only for Ukraine but also for America. If you do care for a lot of defense spending, which not everyone does, but that's my
No,
point.
I think that's important. That's an important. I think that the allocation, and that's been a big thing that's been happening here stateside, is a lot of people are, a lot of the White House is saying that where's this money going, because this money has not, like what you just brought up, is that I guess from what I've been reading, I could get this a little wrong here, but it seems like the Trump administration is like thinking, okay, this money went straight to Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
but Zelensky is saying he didn't touch X amount of money. Like X amount of money is just not, like, it's just gone.
Mm-hmm.
So it is interesting that you bring that up, and I am curious of. I still have yet to see from now the now Trump administration to see a I guess a receipt, or for lack of a better word, like a breakdown of like what you just said, of the percentages, as like, okay, how
Mm-hmm.
much is going to directly, how much is going to manufacturing weapons here and then send
Mm-hmm.
them, how, like, again, context is really important. uh like you basically what you were saying, like context is really important when it comes to a lot of these issues, because while in a blanket statement, like blank, you look at like black and white, it makes, you can see some of the sense that people will be making, or you can see at least where they're coming from. But when you add the context, the proper context to a lot of these things, then you're like, okay, this is not literal. This is how it kind of gets broken down. This is kind of how it goes to here, and so that makes an interesting point to that. That definitely does, and I feel like that is something that a lot of people, amongst the negotiation stuff, is something that a lot of people have, um, I guess, issues with, and I
Mm-hmm.
guess there's a lot of confusion there because of just how, from when the Biden administration was here, it just was like his administration kind of just like, hey, we're sending X amount, like just ridiculous amount of money, and then you
Mm-hmm.
have issues about the unemployment rate and different things like that over here, and then the Trump
Mm-hmm.
administration comes and it's basically like he kind of ran off of, we're just giving away money for
Yeah.
free, not getting anything in return.
Mm-hmm.
And then both administrations, I feel like there's a lack of context that they gave to, that they would have given to the American people properly. We could have had a better dialogue. We could have better dialogue. We could have more transparency with that, so that we could also have open dialogue up with Ukrainians, open dialogue up with Russians, to see, just to get like a full kind of understanding of what's going, better educate ourselves, for lack of better
Mm-hmm.
phrasing. And that's another reason why I'm happy you're able to come on, because I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that people don't get to hear from the Ukrainian side of things, as much. I know there's a lot of protests that happen, especially DC, about it, and a lot of talks, but it's a lot of tensions are really high, and you have a lot of different people who don't even care about either side. They're kind of just there, worried about what's happening stateside, and it kind of taints the conversation as a whole, and we don't get to really get to the actual part of it that really matters here, with with some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess like the last thing I wanted to ask, is, well, second to last thing is, what do you think? I know you kind of alluded to this before, but what do you think, in your opinion, Putin wants out of this? Like, what is
Mm-hmm.
the end game that you, I guess, can theorize, or you can see? Like, what's the point? Because there's not, he's not just doing this for laughs and giggles. There's always a purpose to when things like this happen. So, in your opinion, or just maybe
Mm-hmm.
from what you heard back home, like, what do you think is the end goal for him here?
Yeah, that's, I guess, the million-dollar question. I think, yeah, Putin is interested in like absorbing Ukraine into Russia, because he is committed to this big idea of like reinventing Russia's like empire, because it was like the greatest, make Russia great again type of situation. So like first it was Russian Empire, then it was Soviet Union. So to Putin, the fall of Soviet Union is actually one of the most tragic events of the whole human history. So he wants to like repair what was lost, and like unite all those republics. Like when Ukraine was part of Soviet, when Ukraine was occupied by Soviet, it was called the Republic of Ukraine. So he wants to bring all those other republics together, to like, yeah, bring the big empire back together. So we just like basically like some kind of infinity stone he wants to collect, and but just so happened that like people on that earth are too freedom loving and they're too in his way. So he's just like, I kill them off. Like also that land has lots of resources, so we can take them too. And then from there we'll go further. And actually, like there's really strong idea around Ukrainians that if we do fall and if Ukraine does become absorbed by Russia, and when Russia goes off with its next war, say to like the countries, Baltic countries or Poland or Georgia, Moldova, like um, they will just back up Ukrainians that are left and fill up their like military with those Ukrainians that are still alive. And I'm saying that because I also know, like, so like Russia is the second biggest country in the world after Canada. And it basically stretches from like Eastern Europe all the way to Asia. So the territories of Russia are actually populated with like enormous amount of ethnical groups that were all absorbed by this Russian Empire and stripped of their identity and oppressed and like made forgot to forget their like language and history and make them into like Russians. So what this war is also doing, so like the genocide against Ukraine is clear as a day. We know exactly, everyone can see it. But there's also going on a genocide against all those smaller ethnicities that have been part of Russia since Russian Empire. So they're not taking like those like like white Moscow Russians and sending them. No, no, no. Like they packing the military with those other ethnical groups that stretch like Russia towards Asia, and then that's like their way to also genocide those ethnical groups while they're genociding Ukraine. So, and that kind of genocide is completely unknown. Nobody even like think about it. They just think, oh, every Russian is like, uh, you know, equal and whatever. But like, I think there's a lot of that going on. Um, and I mean, like, I don't have much empathy for anybody in Russia, I guess, at this point. Um, but like, yeah, I just wanted to like make a point that there are other ethnical groups that are being erased by this war.
No, I think that is important to highlight because that happens. That's happened a lot in history. Even America. When you talk about the Native Americans,
Yeah.
you talk about Japan, you talk about Australia, like a lot of these different countries, and what happens with that. And I think that's also, again, another proper context to put around the situation when it comes to countries trying to acquire more land or acquire more territories, require more resources,
Mhm.
and such. But I also, again, want to thank you so much for coming on. And I
Mhm.
guess the last question really is, what what do you believe are some ways that people outside of Ukraine can best
Mhm.
support your family member, like people like your family, people like your friends, the people of Ukraine? Like, what can people who want to help?
Mhm. Okay, that question I really appreciate. And I guess uh, the one thing I always tell people is the best thing to support Ukraine is just to stay informed, because everything that happens in the world is connected, and awareness always leads to action. So uh, it's important to see where you get your news from and try not to fall for baseless propaganda. That there's so much of it. Um, and also, if anything that I said today resonated with anyone, and if anyone would like to support our fight, there's a few organizations that I personally donate to, that I trust and then I love, and who I follow and see a lot of work that they do, and it's incredible. They support both army and civilians. One of them is called Come Back Alive, and the second one is called Pradula Foundation. I can send links to both.
Thank you.
And then also, if you want to just learn more about Ukraine's history and why things are the way they are, and I think it affects world history a lot in general, I highly recommend Timothy Snyder, who is actually an American historian. He's also a Yale professor, and his specialty is like Eastern Europe, Soviet Union, and the Holocaust. And I think he has a really good YouTube channel. So if anyone wants to check it out, yeah.
Great. Roxy, thank you again so much for this. Thank you for your time. I know it's not easy to talk about, but I know it's something you're really passionate about. It means a lot to you. So you talk about it anyway, and you do your best to educate. I know your stories are always, beside your many adventures that you have around the world, but you also, make sure people are educated about what's going on,
Mhm.
and you make your opinions known. And that's why I really respect you. I respect your words, and that's why I really wanted to have you on. So I want y'all to remember to definitely, like Roxy said, educate yourself. Definitely keep up with news. Make sure you vet where you're getting your stuff from. Cite
Mhm.
sources. Those are always really important. There's a reason why they taught us that in grade school for a reason. Don't forget that if you're listening to this podcast, you can watch it exclusively on Spotify. Don't forget to like, drop a comment, subscribe. Again, Roxy, thank you so much for joining us. See you on the next one. Peace out.